Okay, welcome back to part three of this series, where we've been discussing approach really into modeling the way in which penetration testing can be directed in a much more efficient way, and how Troy has brought about his own methodology to use threat modeling and drive interactivity with asset owners, not necessarily application owners, but asset owners. And one of the things we were talking about on a separate session was tooling to choose and GRC and how one can purpose it for that. So mentioning no names, of course, but share with us, Troy. You said you started with the tooling first, didn't you, before you really encoded this program?
Yeah, yes and no. So let's say I've done this without a tool.
Mm-hmm.
Always wanted a tool. And then in one of my more recent businesses, let's just say that when I started there, I was like, okay, the tool is coming first. But that's because I had already kind of like built this in a sense. Like in my
Right.
mind, I knew what I had to do to get done.
Mm.
Um, so if you start one of the things we talked about before is just like the whole security assurance process, right? Now, realistically, you don't need a tool to do that, right? Maybe you need some tools to do specific stuff. You want to do code review, you want to do some penetration testing. It's useful to have tools to do these specific things. But to do security assurance, right, the process is I want to find stuff out. I want to read some documents. And I want to find some risks and some vulnerabilities. If you really want, you can do that through a Jira ticket, or you can do that through, just a document, write down separate Word files what the risks are to an application, create a report. There's a billion ways to do that. However, if you want to do it at scale and in a way that is useful for you in the long term, in the medium to long term, then that's where you need a tool, right? So going back to like early days, you want to do this with 2 applications, 10 applications, cool. As a consultant or as a person, can you remember the results of those 10 applications? Or do you have to go and find those reports that you made, right? Read each one of them. That kind of becomes a problem, right? What does that look like overall, right? Or tracking the questions that you might be sending, tracking all of that kind of information. What about the metadata, right?
Mm.
This is where the GRC tool really comes into its own, right? Because for me, that is the way by which I persist the information that I'm gathering, persist my security assurance, and prove it, right? And it helps me both in the way of like, well, what was this application, but also in the way of like with clients or with other business owners, or even like assessing how good is a policy. Uh, I don't, I don't really ask every single application. Like I don't go and look up every single application to see, hey, are we encrypting stuff? What I do is with a tool, I can see, okay, actually all of the applications have said they are encrypting, or I have some value that says I'm encrypting, and I can look at that at an aggregate level. A tool allows me to do that.
Mm.
I don't go into individual documents to look at what's the risks. I look at the risks overall, and I can drill down into them with the use of a good tool to see, who do risks belong to, or to see the specific details. But a tool gives me the aggregate. And then because there's specific information, it also gives me useful things when, like, let's say talking to a client where I'm like, client asked me, hey, what's your backup policy, or what's your, is the data that we're using with you encrypted? And I'm like, you're talking about this product. I go to that product and I'm like, yes, yeah, it is. We took care of that. Oh, but it isn't this, or this is how access control is managed for that product. So now I'm giving the client specific information too, that's being persistent without me having to go back and read multiple reports about that information. That's where the tool really, really comes into its own for me.
I'm intrigued on one question, which is you mentioned you track the questions. Tell us about that.
In the process of security assurance, I think in most kind of security assurance, what you end up getting, like if you're going to do threat modeling, is you're going to ask a bunch of questions,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully you will get some answers that make some sense to you. And then from that, you can kind of make some decisions and say, these are the problems, right? Or these are the risks. Um, the thing is, what I like to do is to make sure that those answers are kind of codified into a set of attributes or fields. right? So not only do I get those answers back, but I can store them, not just as an assessment, but as like metadata about the application, Again, let's go back to that example about encryption. What I care about in an application is I want to know that it's encrypted. Sometimes in a certain business context, maybe I care about the specifics of that. But most cases, I just want to know whether the data is encrypted transfer at rest, right? I might want to know, is audit logging enabled and where that is at an aggregate level. And then maybe for that specific application, I might want to know, hey, where can I find the audit logs? Or where's the URL for your application? This kind of taking this data and persisting it as part of a record that's where it becomes really helpful, because that means I can measure stuff. That means I have a point of reference. But it also means something, again, depending on the tool that you use, it can also make life easier for the business owner later on, right? So past this client thing, if you want to recertify an application, but stuff hasn't changed, do you ask all the same questions over again? Or do you just re-verify and say, hey, this is what we knew about your application a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 6 months ago, whatever. Is this still all true? Right. So there's kind of like this this subtle excellence or subtle benefit from being able to persist information about applications. The same way that you do with vulnerabilities, to be honest.
So cool.
Right. Now, like SaaS, go ahead.
Well, I now want to sort of compare and contrast. So, Ankit, tell us about your experiences and how that enhances you in finding serious flaws that clearly are the things that we really want to find for those application owners. How does it get you to that point, using the example of encryption, for example?
So all the question and answers are there. Now, I get in, and if I have to do a pen test, then I get so much context. Without even doing a pen test, just by looking at those question and answers, I know, okay, so there's a problem over here. I don't have to necessarily break something, just to validate that, because I have those answers, and there is a dialogue happening between me and a product owner. Now, another thing, through these dashboards and the whole transparency things and how transparency solves that friction problem between different teams, collaboration becomes easy. So next time when you are doing the same thing, like, okay, we did a review of your product or your asset a few months ago, and then now we are just checking, like, did something change, or are all those answers still true, or maybe you improve something. So you are maturing your security posture. And now, as a third party, like pen tester, what were my skills? I'm just a traditional pen tester. Now I have this platform that is now making me a risk manager now. So not just me, but also your product owners, because they have gone through this exercise. And it's not that why does this question matter? Like, just click on that link. There's the documentation, and how everything just connects back, how it connects to each other. It becomes so easy. You start learning new things. And see, this whole security thing, it becomes complex because a dev team, a product owner, mostly they're not incentivized to do this additional thing, right? And then as a security person, I just have to go in there and say, okay, security is totally my responsibility, and you know nothing about security. Ego, just get rid of it. It's not going to work out. So as a security person, what I learned was that don't just get into validating and revalidating issues. Like, start with validating that person first, their efforts. Like, why is my report is the only thing that matters the most? Like, showing off, look what I found, how I found one small leakage and I turned it into a complete takeover, and look how cool I am. Let's not do that. I mean, okay, do that if your report looks that awesome and you have my respect. Then when you're talking to a product owner, let them talk about what they have built too. Let them take pride in what they have built as well, like their documentation, their reports. So I'm not able to incentivize them for their efforts, but just be decent about it. And just don't go out there and start criticizing them. Say, okay, let's start with what you have done. And because you have this dashboard that has already given you so much context, you should start validating the good things that they're doing first.
You said validate the business owner, but I think that you validate the application, right? So like we've talked about that a little bit, like how I approach this and what the GRC tool is. Hidden behind some of that, like, okay, question about encryption or audit logs, but they're also the metadata then persisting is also what is the context of this application? Who does it serve? What kind of application is it? What's the value to the business? Which helps for the rest of the model and what's in business impact and when do risks really matter, right? And part of that is about asking about the application, right? Like, look, full reality, like some people won't like this, but if I have a big vulnerability on an application that doesn't really matter, I'm not going to spend that much effort on it. As a security person, I'm not going to spend that much effort. I'll let that person know. That's my job to make sure that they know. But I'm not going to ring the bells of the business and be like, I can't believe they did this. I can't believe there was a SQL injection on a website that has literally no data and you can't log into. I mean, it's like one of them sounds really bad, but it's that context of like, this really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Or it's just not as important. This is at worst a little bit of a reputation. Somebody's just like, yeah, that looked bad, but whatever. Nothing could really happen, right? Versus some other kind of thing. And that's validating the application. That's the context. In our last chat, we talked about how like what I'm trying to do is reverse things. It is. I'm not really thinking about the vulnerabilities of an application first. I'm not really thinking about, how many specific problems there are. What I'm thinking about first is what does this application do? And as a result of its value proposition, of its kind of impact, what kind of problems could arise? And then within that context, I start asking the questions about, okay, well, what forms it? We talked about it. This is that philosophy that like, accidents and substances. This is a book is made out of paper and ink and whatever. But the story, the content of that book is the words, the thoughts, its meaning, right? And this is actually most of the time is more important than this, right? What it means, what its substance is generally more important than what it's made out of, right? But if you're going to do security properly, you have to understand what it's made out of as well, right? But think about this first, and then think about this, right? And then relate them, and that's like kind of... Then you have problems that are grounded in the reality of what they mean to the application. Then you have a risk that is meaningful to a business owner, that is meaningful to the application, that is... not blown out of proportion, that is, well, I guess proportional to the thing that you're dealing with. And then therefore you can make a proportional amount of effort on it, right? Spend the right time threat modeling the right, pen testing the right thing, and don't spend time on the stuff that is low value.
Right. So essentially you've eliminated that horrible process of either triaging what's there because you need to triage the number down based on the effort you can put in, or as so many people struggle with, you didn't scan, you didn't do a piece of work, therefore you didn't know, therefore there's nothing to close. But now I've done it, I feel anxious about, I have to close everything. That's another mindset that you see, isn't it? So this is just taking a totally different dimension and looking at things for what they should be, as opposed to making those two very awkward decisions.
And I absolutely don't have the approach of we have to close everything. Like, I simply don't think it's realistic. You will always find a problem. Like, literally, security people, that's what we're trained to do. You're like, ooh, something's wrong. If you're not doing that, maybe, I don't know. Like, it's super normal for a security person to do that. So you can find... So it's not realistic to then believe that you will solve all the problems that you can find. You have a finite amount of time and resources. And I do not impose that on business owners as far as much as possible. So it's about like the security assurance process is in itself a bit of a triage process. The triage is actually a little bit more for the security teams to be like, dude, you focus on the stuff that's really important, but it's for them as well. Like the risk, I mean, I would say the security assurance process, part of like determining business impact, is the triage process for us. And then the risk management process is the triage process for the business owner. It's like, here's all the kind of stuff you have. This is the important one. This is the not so important one.
So Troy, my final question for you in this series, and then I suspect we'll be doing some more. This is so interesting. And as you know, we've all spoken about this for many an hour together and working the detail out. But did you anticipate that threat modeling plus GRC could be so not dry and so alive in bringing value to the business and simplifying your world and ultimately reducing risk? Did you see that as a consequence that was going to come out of this?
No. People see me nowadays as a GRC person, which I think is interesting. Because I don't think, like, I'm naturally more of an engineer builder, like I'm naturally a little bit more technical. But I've come to enjoy the GRC space because of this ground up kind of approach. Because I'm kind of saying, looking at things from an application, but me, it's not ground up. It's like I'm looking at this medium level and then looking down and then looking up to kind of get a sense of things. And that for me is kind of exciting because now, as like being regional security managers or heads of security or whatever being the roles that I'm in, I'm kind of responsible for things in a transversal way, right? I have to tell boards and execs and stakeholders, hey, this is how we're doing, but I need to be realistic and grounded. At the same time, I need to still have that conversation with that really technical person or with a client that's like, yeah, this is what you should care about. And we, understand our application, or we understand whatever. And the way GRC unlocks me to do that, or at least, my style of governance, risk, and compliance unlocks me to do that and allows me to have far more confidence and certainty in the security of my business, right? And that's, I don't know, that's key. So yeah, it is exciting. I even 5 years ago, if you asked me, like risk management, I would have been like, yeah, I kind of like it's useful, but now I just love it. I don't just love it. I think it's fundamental. You do it correctly, you can really maximize your business. And I think people don't like it because the amount of effort that's put into it is generally just so small. It's like, yeah, you're just not getting value out of risk management because you're not really identifying it. It's not really attached to the real stuff that's happening. And therefore, yeah, it's kind of boring and therefore kind of disconnected and kind of useless. But if you do it the other way, and
it's so much fun.
It's fun. Then it's like, yeah, this is a real thing. It's a real problem. I deal with that. Cool. I've checked a box, but I've got something from security that is actually actionable. And if I do this, I will improve this, and I will improve my application in a way that is meaningful.
Totally agree. And
learning is so much fun. Those dialogues. I love the whole interactions and all. And that's what makes this whole risk management fun for me. Asset and risk management, both of those things. So much fun.
I must jump in on this one to hold us to time, but Ankit, to hear a pen tester say that makes me proud as well, because clearly that's, I think we've all seen the light in this modern world. I think we need to wrap up here and say that concludes our 3-part series. I suspect once we release this, there will be a whole bunch of Q&A. So we'll probably put some functionality in there to capture that and then aggregate that Q&A and feed that back. I'd encourage everyone to look at Troy's blog as well, Troy Cunningham. We'll put your details up on this blog as well, so people can see some of your musings and thoughts on your LinkedIn as well. But for the moment, I've really, really enjoyed this as always. Troy, Ankit, thank you.